I was sad to learn that the history of church that is taught in churches is contrary to the one that is taught in seminaries, in academia. And I would like to, for the benefit of the viewers, I'd like to give a fine example. And this is the narrative of persecution of early Christians. Have you heard about it, Kamalji? This
Yes.
narrative being peddled. Oh, the Christians died for their faith. Who would die for a fraud? Who
Right.
would give away their lives for a lie? Christianity has to be true because the early Christians died for their faith in Jesus. So stuff like this, I'm sure you've heard.
Yes.
So this is one of the tricks that Christianity uses to convert,
Right.
and that is appeal to emotions. So it plays this sob story that Jesus died for you and the early Christians were persecuted for their faith in Jesus and his resurrection. So they brainwash you by asking who would die for a lie, right? So Walker gives you a totally different picture about these persecutions. So he writes of two different groups of Messiah believers who came to be called later as Christians, living in Jerusalem in the first century. One group is the Greek speaking diaspora Jewish believers called the Hellenists. They are Hellenized, Greekized. And the second group is the Aramaic speaking Palestinian converts. So the Hellenized Christians did not respect the Jewish law or the Jewish temple because of their conversion into this new religion, the Messiah religion. So the Jewish elders did not tolerate this. Whereas the Aramaic speaking Christians habitually demonstrated respect and regard for the law. They did not lose that respect. It was their habit, right? They came from the same flock. So, Christianity began in Jerusalem, right? So they came from that same flock. So they continued their habit of respecting the law and the temple. But the Hellenized Jewish believers did not. So Walker writes that Stephen is one of the Hellenized believers, and Christianity uses his name mightily when it talks of persecution of Christians. So Stephen and his Greek-speaking fellow believers were persecuted. And the Bible says that, Bible calls the execution of Stephen was stoned to death, by the way. So the Bible calls the execution of Stephen as the great persecution of the church. It's just one execution, but I'll tell you why he was executed, not because of his faith in Jesus or in Messiah. But that's what Christianity wants you to believe. So Stephen and his Greek-speaking fellow believers, the Hellenized believers, Walker says, were not persecuted because of their belief in Jesus as the Messiah, but because they talked blasphemous words against Moses and the Jewish God. And they spoke as though they were prepared to discard, certain demands of the law. They said the law is useless. It doesn't have to be followed. All this in the light of their new faith. So he says actually the persecutions were selective and touched upon only those Christians, the Hellenists, who spoke words against the temple and the law. And the Aramaic speaking community was relatively undisturbed. Now, interestingly, the Bible, as I said, says something, it describes an event where these Hellenized believers, because of the persecution or because of the stoning of Stephen, left Jerusalem and went out into the other cities. And the Aramaic speaking Palestinian converts continued to live in Jerusalem. Of course, they had their own identity. They broke bread, they practiced baptism, they gathered in assemblies and all that, but they stayed back in Jerusalem. Now, the question is, if the church was persecuted for their faith, church in the sense, this assembly of Jesus believers, if that was really persecuted, like Christianity wants you to believe, why would the Aramaic speaking Palestinian Christians stay back in Jerusalem, would they not have run away like the Hellenist believers? They stayed back, and the Bible tells this. And they lived harmoniously with the Jewish elders. So when I read this, from this perspective, not that I did not read about this incident from the Bible, but it never jumped out at me as something unusual. But when I was reading it from an academic perspective, from an apologist who just laid it out for me, it broke the spell, actually. Whatever remaining faith I had, that just collapsed. So I came to understand for the first time that this narrative, this sob story, was nothing but a fabrication. That made me ask, if this is a fabrication, what else is fabrication?
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.